Right, I stole the minister's prop. It's what he normally wears to infrastructure conferences. But seriously, I bought my own. My head is not quite so big, Minister. There you go. Anyway, pleasure to be here today, and what an exciting challenge the Infrastructure Commission has. And well laid out, Alan, and particularly that business about planning for 30 years, getting a master plan for this country as a whole. And interesting people that we have here on the panel, including Mr. Goldsmith, who I was going to invite you to talk from the floor, but the Minister has actually brought you onto the panel. I'm pleased to see that. And I think we might start with you, Paul. Just Shane Jones has laid out, obviously, with the introduction of the Infrastructure Commission, and a pretty big plan from the government recently. Is there any gaps as you project forward to thinking about where we might get to in 30 years?
Well, thank you, Fran. You've got Simon Bridges on the call here. Maybe I should put him on speaker.
No, no, you. It's all you. You've got to be brief.
Yes, indeed. Look, great to be here. And the question's about what
30 years, and thinking forward to 30 years.
Well, look, I mean, I think we all, and that's why everybody in the Parliament voted for the Infrastructure Commission, and the desire to have a long pipeline of works that we can build up momentum and the ability in the industry to do that. So that all makes good sense. And, the other two sort of key elements, I think, are an absolute focus on reducing the cost of infrastructure. New Zealand is expensive, and the cost structure that underlies it, and the RMA is a big part of that, is a critical part of the exercise. Third part is around flexibility and innovation around the funding so that we can get the money to where we need to go. So those three elements all have to be part of the discussion that we have.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much on that. And Minister, I mean, you've obviously got quite a vision what might happen in Northland and Auckland through the supply chain project. Do you want to project where that actually might go in 30 years, perhaps starting even in 5 years?
I'll be characteristically candid, not quite as much as Wayne Brown, who's in the audience, but I'll leave you Aucklanders to him. Yeah. Look, the supply chain study, my colleagues in Labour have been faithful. They said that they would back a study. Additional information is being amassed by a battalion of gnomes in the Ministry of Transport, so I have no confidence that anything will happen of great merit there. But the reality is there's a lot of risk around moving a port, and there is a lot of inertia, and I have to accept that my rhetoric as a politician from a minority party, I was mandated to bring the issue forward, and then it becomes the action of a government. And the government tends to obviously turn to the professional bureaucracy, and they, of their nature, are risk averse. That's just the way New Zealand's developed. So I'm waiting with professionalism and what the Commission might say, but I don't want to say that Labour have not done what they said they'd do. They said they would back a study. It was ably led by Wayne Brown and with the involvement of the KiwiRail CEO. So it's really up now to what the parties comprising the government can agree to do prior to the election. Everyone knows my aspirations, or some may think biases. But hey, I'm a politician. What do you expect from me?
Greg, would you like to comment there? And thank you for the presentation before, because it actually really stunning around Palmerston North. But just thinking about this broader vision and the role rail can play in delivering social outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. In terms of social outcomes, what's apparent is that the commuter demand for metro rail is growing flat out, and we need to meet that and catch up on ourselves, to be fair. In the domestic freight task, the statistics are constantly talking about a doubling, and that's happening. And that means greater trucks, greater shipping, and greater rail integrated. So a combination of capabilities that align for New Zealand benefit is a must. Best use of capital is the only way to do that. And you'll see from our strategy that it's an integrated plan. How does road, rail and sea align? In terms of the port component, having been involved in a previous role in Australia and Asia, there is no certainty in my mind about the need to address the port infrastructure overcapitalisation debt to ratepayers. And we can't easily see that as individual ratepayers, but they're overcapitalised in every port in New Zealand. There's too many. We don't need 11. And with the international shipping market changes, so 30 years ago there was 20 shipping lines all competing. Now there's 5. So they've consolidated. So we need to think the same with ports, because we have been marginalised as exporters by the shipping lines. So we have to say consolidation leads to consolidations. Best use of land is a must, and that will be the driver. What is the cost of the land asset, and really is it best use, in my view? So long run, growth in rail capability for freight, growth in metro rail capability, but let's look at the use of our land assets for things like ports and their locations.
Yeah, I think what you will bring out is this tension between the politicians and also where the Infrastructure Commission will be in taking a non-biased look and a very forward-leaning look at the future and making decisions that are perhaps a little bit more in the national interest as opposed to potentially political interests, local interests, interests of KiwiRail, interests of port companies. So how do you actually get something, how do you juggle that around so the Infrastructure Commission gets to play its role and doesn't have it telescoped by all you guys first? Yes, you.
The Infrastructure Commission is a really smart thing to do. It's actually about the future. It's not the mistakes of yesterday, and it's bringing the best competency across all those big questions. Yeah. Your question earlier about social licence, I believe, will be bigger than the environmental one. Okay. The environmental one's got the right place right now, but social is getting louder. If you take the Port of Tauranga, immense pressure with its road network expansion issues across its region, and it can't operate with 500,000 truck hauls a year across the port. Social licence for road congestion in Auckland City. We're over it. Motorways are overly congested and expensive to be on, and we're scared of toll roads for some strange reason. So we have to go to other modes of choice.
I'll just bring in Dean and also Darryl-Lee before we come back to the politicians. But Dean, 1991 the RMA was introduced. I don't know how many times I've written about complaints and things about it. Are we finally going to nail the changes and move forward to get to somewhere in the next 30 years, which is...
Finally going to nail the changes. I'm really pleased with the work the panel's doing. Our hope is that the recommendations are taken and are taken seriously, and they do find a way and do get cross-party support, because it is time for a change. We all know that. I think the way that we're looking at it is it needs to be future-focused. I often reflect, this is our house, this is our land, this is our water. We have to protect it. If we compromise that, then it doesn't matter how you deal with the infrastructure question. You don't have a great place to live, and New Zealanders respect that. So I think we do have to take this seriously, and you do have to do some quality spatial planning. You do have to think about the future needs of your citizens and your environment, and get that right, and then you will create the future we're talking about. You will have a strategy around where you put your rail, and where you put ports, and how your cities grow, and what happens with how people move. I'm a firm believer in what we're doing. You will get the social licence to operate because you're not screwing things up on the way through.
Our politicians...
That answers the question, but that was my take on it.
Our politicians, I'll just come back to Darryl-Lee in a minute, but both of you, are we actually going to get cross-party consensus finally on RMA?
Well, it depends what people come up with. I mean, you can reform something and make it worse, or you can make it better. And so we've got to be practical about the real trade-offs that we have. We want to have affordable housing. But in Auckland, everywhere you want to build a house is in a volcanic view shaft, for example. And so society has to work out what its priorities are and recognise that there are trade-offs. I think what we've done in the past is that we've just continued to agree to all sorts of things that make sense individually, but collectively they add up to very expensive housing and very expensive infrastructure and very slow development right across the board. And so I think we need a practical, honest discussion about those trade-offs and also a focus on the consequences in terms of the affordability of housing and many other things for New Zealanders. And so I heard the speech, and then I heard a lot of things that could make progress, and I heard a lot of things that could add even more costs. And so that's the challenge that we've got to work our way through.
Just briefly, Shay.
Very briefly, in 1989, I worked for Jeffrey Palmer with Catherine Ashley-Jones, Joan Allen, and Denise Church, and we were the core group that wrote the Resource Management Act.
Oh,
So I'm sure
Well,
I
you should resign.
sounded like Dean Kimpton then as well. And my boss is sitting in the second row, Roger Blakely. I'd say something very simple. The RMA came into being 1990-91. It reformed a whole lot of statutes that went back to the Second World War. We've had 30 years of it. I do not believe the current system of relying exclusively on territorial and regional authorities to make a lot of these big decisions is sustainable. I am, as a politician of the New Zealand First Portion, I'm going to take decision-making back to ministers because it horrifies me that huge projects can be held up and social advantage and social advancement can be held ransom to small and, in my view, unsustainable elements, and they're crippling the overarching growth of the country, and I'm going to campaign on that.
There you go. Darryl-Lee, I mean, you talked about the importance of collaboration. How do we actually get that going? Obviously, there's a bit happening in our city of Cones down on the waterfront. I mean, that wouldn't be happening so fast without informal collaboration. But how do you actually play that really out and institutionalise it for the future?
I guess, Fran, I think it probably is happening naturally as we evolve as an industry, and I know that's probably, as we get newer younger people joining our industry, that's the way that they work, that's the way that they've learnt to operate. They do that in their education setting, and so I think they will demand that from us. And I think they also focus on the conversation that that's been happening here around the fact that they're focused on those social outcomes and those community outcomes. So having a long-term plan around what those communities look like is the most important aspect that we're talking about here. I guess I'd like to make the point that we talk very much around how infrastructure responds to community, but actually infrastructure shapes community. So it's so incredibly important to know what that community outcome is in a long term, so that we can actually start thinking about what infrastructure we need to start planning for now, because some of it we won't build as opposed to will build. So that strategy will enable us to be quite considered and making critical decisions at the right time, I think.
And you talked also earlier about the importance of diversity and bringing different mindsets and also professions to the table, and there's not merely engineers, is that how I read
absolutely. And apologies to the engineers, but I really do think that the engineering industry is no longer just for engineers.
Yeah.
What we want is an industry of people who all have areas of expertise that they can contribute. There is no one expert that's driving this anymore, and in fact, when we do that, I think that's when sometimes we fail to miss it. We miss a few tricks. So we are thinking about what are the things that we haven't thought of are the most important aspects to really including that diversity. I think, when I went to university, and maybe I missed a few, but I'm sure there was only about 6 disciplines at engineering school. I can't tell you how many there are. I don't know, maybe I was just blind. But, there are so many disciplines coming out, and I know even, in the firm that we're in, we have, we have 65 different disciplines operating in our business. And that diversity, we're very clearly multidiscipline, and so clearly at the heart, that's what makes our industry work.
I'm just, in summary, going to ask each of you very briefly to say where do we want to be in 30 years and how we get there. Then I hope to take a couple of questions from the floor as well. So if we can start perhaps over the far side there and then come back to the Minister.
Well, look, I think everybody, I think, believes that New Zealand has a great future. We're a wonderful country. We produce goods that the world wants, and so we're ambitious for New Zealand. And so in 30 years, we want to see the country continuing to grow, having the infrastructure that it needs to get things around quickly and efficiently, and also preserving what is special about this country, which is the quality of the environment, our social cohesion, and all these things. And I'm very optimistic about it. I think we've got a great future.
Thank you. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I agree. That is the vision we want. The question is how we get there, isn't it? And
with the RM Review panel hat on, I see one of the key planks to getting there are going to be the way that we engage with our communities and design that future. And I'm calling that spatial planning. You can call it whatever you want, but that integration. I see a future where we can be more resilient and more adaptive to change. We're talking about climate change today and environmental deterioration and growth. What will we be talking about in 30 years' time? And have we got the ability to respond and adapt to that? And I think those are going to be two key elements of what our future looks like. We will have thought about it, and you'll see it emerging, and we will be more agile and resilient to change.
I think it's essential for us to align on our vision, and I think that's one of the key things with Alan that we've talked about. So getting alignment on the vision and then having the courage to chase it down. I think, too often with short-term government, too much short-term thinking, and we're paying for that. Other countries have not behaved as badly as we have. So we've got to grow up and get on top of that. The other thing, if you talk about the rail perspective, it's more integration. The freight task will grow, the commuter task will grow, and it's how we best use that capital for a better outcome. So 50% of our tonnage on rail would be a smart outcome at lowest cost for NZ. If the rail goes and the road bill's 60 billion, who's going to pay that? No one.
Okay, point made. Darryl-Lee.
I think my comment would be not in a situation where we're debating, starting a 30-year strategy. So I would say, being in a position where we're agile enough to be able to respond to the changing demands, because that is one thing we know that will continue to change. Change will continue to happen. So I guess, agile and writing the next 30-year strategy.
Matuashe?
Resilience for our provincial towns, moderation of immigration. Many of our infrastructure woes are driven by the fact that we've grown to 5 million people. It came as an absolute astonishment to me that we'd put on another 1 million people in New Zealand in a short period of time. And thirdly, I think the jury's out and the days are over for the current structure of local government in New Zealand. Territorial authorities without the rating base, without the expertise, trying to deliver water and failing in my area. These issues will never change until we have a group of politicians, not unlike the generation of Preble in them, who just cut through and get things done. And that can only happen when we go out and test these ideas and win a mandate to do so.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes for just a couple of questions from the floor. Over the back. All right.
I'd like to ask the panel, we're sitting on the verge of the largest transport infrastructure investment, and while I was really excited and optimistic with what was presented this morning, the level of due diligence and open discussion about how that transport infrastructure investment in Auckland is not taking place. How would that be dealt with by Infrastructure New Zealand, and what hope do we have in the future of this project being dealt with in this way?
I won't comment on which and when the direction will travel. I presume, sir, you're talking about light rail. I remind you that it's not in the coalition agreement between Labour and New Zealand First. I would expect, however, that a $10 billion project would be the subject of some serious teeth gnashing and work by the Infrastructure Commission. There's some enormous lessons to be learnt, I think, from looking at the railway loop. And I remind all you people here, you Aucklanders, it started off at $2 billion. It grew by 80%. It's now 2.5 billion. And I'm very, very nervous about any major project where we do not have a good grip on how we're going to pay for it, who's going to pay for it, and when we actually need it.
Well, in the spirit of bipartisanship, I hasten to be critical, but the only our worry is that when you're making major infrastructure decisions, such as light rail, such as moving the port, the wrong way to do it is to have it based on 3 days of coalition negotiations at the start of a government. The right way to do it is to go about it and through something such as the Infrastructure Commission, so that everybody can be confident around the decisions that have been made. They're not just about horse trading between parties. And these very significant projects need to have a robust case put forward clearly, and that's what we need to see. And we haven't. 2 years, we still don't know what the purpose of the light rail one is, for example, whether it's urban regeneration down Dominion Road or going to the airport. They're two different purposes, and we still don't know which one it is. And so that's what we've got to work our way through in a rational way.
Just one final brief question, just here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Sharon Mason. I'm the Chief Executive of Fuller District Council on the West Coast. I'd like to start by thanking Manto Jones for the announcement today, particularly around ports for the West Coast and enabling resilience. The fishing industry is really important to the West Coast. It's been really great to listen to the panel today. What I would like to say is that the West Coast would like to engage with the Infrastructure Committee. You know, infrastructure is really important to us, particularly for transport and logistics. On many occasions, we've lost a number of businesses being able to set up on the West Coast because the cost of transport and logistics outweighs their abilities. So we lose opportunities to be able to bring new people to the West Coast. So all I would say is we'd really like to engage with you. Don't forget about us. We want to be there and we want to be part of this. I think that's really important. And Minister Jones, if you don't mind me saying, please don't lump all of local authorities into one pot with a statement. There are some of us who are very solution-based and proactive. So.
Okay. Point made. Thank you very much. Because we're pressed for time, I'd now like to thank all of the panellists. And, we'll check in 10 years' time and see how we're going. I'm not sure in 30 years that all of us will be there, but you never know. So thank you very much.